Episode 4, Find Her, Keep Her. This is another episode I remember vividly from watching as a kid. Also, this is the episode I mentioned in part 1, the one that won the Humanitas Prize for promoting human dignity, meaning, and freedom. So I guess let's, see if it does that. So the episode starts with Rabbit and the other toys out in a snowstorm trying to protect a carrot from the cold when they hear a baby bird calling for help. So even though the idea of desperately trying to save one carrot from the snow is silly, it actually really works for me seeing Rabbit abandon it when the bird needs help. Like, on the one hand, saving this carrot actually was important to Rabbit, and he even gives a pretty heartfelt "Forgive me" when he abandons it. On the other hand, it is just a carrot, so it's a credit to Rabbit that despite earnestly caring about it, he'll give it up when something more important needs his attention. Hey Pooh, is that the hero scarf from the pilot? Neat. Anyway, this bird is named Kessie, and Rabbit ends up taking her in because he thinks he's the only one who's responsible enough to keep her safe. So at this point, it looks like it's going to be one of those taking care of a baby episodes that TV shows do, but fortunately it's not. Kessie can mostly talk right from the beginning, and she's only an actual baby for like 2 scenes, since the episode takes place over the course of an entire year, and in that time we see Kessie grow up to what I would guess is adolescence. It's actually pretty cool, and like the chase scene from Friend Indeed, it makes the story feel big, only temporally this time instead of spatially. Also, the limited amount of time Kessie spends as an actual baby keeps her from getting irritating. Like, I guess some people like babies and stuff, but I'm not one of those people. And I don't trust those people. So Rabbit starts out apparently annoyed about having to take care of Kessie, not wanting to be called daddy, briefly going completely insane, that kind of thing. Pooh even says he thinks Rabbit just doesn't like Kessie. But it's clear very early that Rabbit actually is extremely dedicated to taking care of her and can't bear the thought of anything happening. So after a nearly tragic bathing incident, Kessie ends up floating away, and Rabbit has to chase her down, and after retrieving her, he makes her promise she won't
go so high ever again.
So, since Kessie is a bird and all, this promise will obviously be a problem later on. It's an oddly specific promise to exact, considering Kessie didn't go so high of her own volition this time. At this point, it seems Rabbit's main concern is Kessie's safety, but the incident plants a seed of dread in Rabbit's mind at the thought of losing her, which will manifest in some pretty nasty ways later on. So fast forward to spring when Kessie's a bit older, and we get this scene of Rabbit and Kessie in Rabbit's garden, and Rabbit finds this special carrot that Kessie planted herself as a gift for Rabbit. Tigger shows up and takes Kessie out bouncing, but ends up putting both of them in mortal danger by bouncing up this unstable tree on the edge of a cliff. It tips over and leaves them dangling over the precipice, and remember, Kessie can't fly yet, so she is susceptible to fall damage. So Rabbit hears them calling for help, and okay. So this scene gets fucking real. Rabbit's frozen in complete terror, looking over the edge, while Kessie's crying out for help. They're both staring death right in the face, and it feels like it. Even Tigger looks really scared. Less for himself, I think, but more for Kessie, who, I guess weighs just enough that he can't pull himself up while she's hanging on his little tail there. So, yeah, I'll buy it. So Tigger tries to toss her up for Rabbit to catch, and, yep, she's dead. Rabbit watches her fall to her death, and then straight up jumps to his own death trying to get her back. Tigger catches him, fortunately. But before you write this off as Rabbit just being dumb, which, I mean, he is, but before you write it off, remember that a minute ago, Rabbit was paralyzed with fear looking over this edge. And now he just jumps over into certain death. It's intense. Rabbit's crushed. And listen to Tigger here.
Wait a minute, buddy boy. She's gone.
She's gone. She's gone. And then this.
Oh, Tigger. I never even told her I loved her.
Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age, but I was totally shook by how raw the emotion was here. And yeah, she's not actually dead, but in this moment, it feels like she is. And it rules. Al happens to find Kessie mid-fall, and after almost letting someone fall to their death for a second time in 2 episodes, he does eventually get his together enough to rescue her. He offers to teach Kessie to fly, and Rabbit says no, citing the promise Kessie made before. So I get that Rabbit's maybe traumatized by this latest tree incident, plus the earlier bath incident, but what he says to Kessie is,
Flying will lead to no good.
But flying actually would have prevented the tragedy that just almost happened. And this comes right after Al brings up the idea of Kessie flying south for the winter. So I think it's clear that by this point, Rabbit's aversion to Kessie flying is about not losing her, and not really about keeping her safe. He reminds Kessie about the promise she made about not going too high. You know, the one he got her to make when she was just a baby. It's pretty sick, honestly. Like, sick in the bad way, not the radical way. In fact, I'd go so far as to call it most unradical. Fast forward to summer, and we see Rabbit reading Kessie a story, and Kessie looking absolutely miserable, still wanting to fly. Well, I say Rabbit's reading. The story he's telling is about Kessie needing Rabbit to protect her, which I don't think is in this book. Also, I know from Pooh's Grand Adventure that Rabbit can barely read, so I think it's safe to say Rabbit's just ad-libbing the story and pretending to read it. Yikes. Fast forward to autumn when Kessie starts secretly trying to learn to fly on her own, and Pooh, Tigger, and Piglet end up trying to help her. Now, I find the dynamic here interesting. Kessie tells Pooh Rabbit doesn't want her to fly, though later Pooh says Rabbit only told Owl not to teach Kessie to fly, and I'm not sure if he really thinks Rabbit only meant Owl, or if he thinks he's found a clever loophole. Tigger was there when Rabbit told Kessie not to fly earlier, so he ought to know how Rabbit feels about this as well. He does later take a stand on the matter and tell Rabbit he should
Give the kid a chance.
I guess I just have to wonder, are Pooh and Tigger 100% oblivious when they agree to help Kessie, or do they realize Rabbit doesn't want this, but are doing it anyway because they think it's the right thing to do? I'd like to think it's the latter, but that might be giving the toys too much credit. Anyway, by this point, Rabbit has completely transformed into the villain of this story. Kessie tells Rabbit that flying means everything to her, and Rabbit answers with a question.
Does it mean more than I do?
I mean, what can I say? His own desire to not lose Kessie, he puts above Kessie's desire to fly. He frames Kessie's desire to fly as a betrayal, and it's pretty cruel and also pathetic. So one giant slingshot accident later, Kessie learns to fly, and the other toys openly celebrate this achievement in front of an obviously miserable Rabbit. And the following scene is honestly a little hard to watch. Fast forward to winter, when it's almost time for Kessie to fly south. She asks Rabbit to read her one last bedtime story, and Rabbit despondently tells her that she doesn't need him for that, or for anything, and leaves the room. And Kessie sits down in front of the fireplace and just starts bawling. We get a good, solid 20 seconds of Kessie's wailing sobs echoing through Rabbit's house, while Rabbit, definitely able to hear Kessie, who, remember, is crying because of what he just said to her, and he just sits here, feeling sorry for himself. So we come to the climax. Kessie is with the other animals, and it's time for her to fly south, but she doesn't want to go without saying goodbye to Rabbit, who's absent. But Owl tells Kessie that the wind is right and she should start south now, so she says her goodbyes to the others and takes off. Rabbit arrives just moments too late, clutching Kessie's special carrot in his hand, which he'd been held up trying to find. Now, this climax perplexes me. See, Rabbit hasn't made peace with the idea of Kessie being independent, and hasn't come to say goodbye. No, he runs after her to the edge of the cliff, yelling that he's changed his mind and will let her fly, as long as she just doesn't leave. And just... my God. The pathos. So on one level, this scene gets me real good. It's heartbreaking in a way that Rabbit arriving and apologizing for his mistakes and ready to bid Kessie a fond farewell just couldn't be. But it makes me uneasy for the same reason. Rabbit doesn't really change. He's here to bargain for Kessie to stay. He thought preventing Kessie from flying would keep her with him before, but now he's desperate and he thinks letting her fly will work better to keep her there, so he changes his tactic and goes with that. But his end goal is still to keep Kessie with him at any cost. I mean, I'd expected the carrot to be Rabbit's going away present, but if he still wasn't planning on saying goodbye, then what was it for? Did he expect it to help convince her to stay? I mean, maybe you could argue that Rabbit was there to say goodbye, but when he realized he'd missed Kessie leaving, he lost his composure and his plea for her to stay just slipped out. That's a little better, but it still means Rabbit's innermost self still wants what's best for him over what's best for Kessie. Even in this best-case scenario, he hasn't grown much. He's just trying to put on a brave face because he can't have what he really wants, and ultimately he can't even manage to do that. So, just like when she fell from the tree earlier, Kessie's not really gone, not yet anyway. She comes back to say goodbye to Rabbit, along with the carrot, which he dropped off a cliff and she caught in the air, I guess. They hug, and Rabbit seems happy, but in a moment, we cut to the final scene after Kessie's left. What happened in between? Did Rabbit apologize? Did he try to convince her again to stay? It could make a huge difference in how I, at least, perceive Rabbit here at the end of the story, but I guess we just don't know. In the final scene, Pooh says that he's looking forward to seeing Kessie again in spring. Piglet talks about how surprised he is that Rabbit liked Kessie after all, despite acting grumpy around her, an observation that I, the audience, am thoroughly past and not interested in considering whatsoever. But then Pooh states what I think must be intended to be the episode's thesis.
Sometimes people care too much. I think it's called love.
So, if you ask me, the reason Rabbit goes from being fairly heroic early in the episode to becoming kind of a monster by the end isn't that he cares too much about Kessie. Caring about Kessie would mean wanting what's best for her no matter what, and since Kessie is a bird, that means letting her fly south for the winter, even if he is sad to see her go. So whether we agree with Pooh's definition of love or not, I don't think it applies to Rabbit here. The more I think about it, the more I disagree with how I feel the episode takes Rabbit's side in the end, justifying everything he did as the product of love. The only way I can understand Rabbit in this story is as someone acting not out of love, but out of need. He needs Kessie and proves over and over that he's willing to hurt her in order to keep her. From the moment when he makes Kessie choose between him and flying, I think we have good reason to pity him. I mean, I think Kessie's presence must fill some hole in Rabbit. Maybe before Kessie he used his garden to fill the hole, judging by the way he talks to the carrot in that opening snowstorm scene. But at some point in the story he started using Kessie instead, and he's so desperate not to feel empty that he'll even hurt her like this just to keep her here and keep that hole filled. But even if I think Rabbit is pretty terrible in this story, that doesn't mean I don't like the episode. It feels real to me. People don't hurt others for just no reason or because they're inherently bad and like to hurt people. They do it because they themselves are hurting, and that hurt that they feel blinds them to the effect that their actions can have on others. It drives them to make excuses to themselves to justify doing whatever it is they think will make them feel better. And this episode shows that very human tendency in action. And as much as I don't like what Rabbit does to Kessie in this story, the tragedy here is really Rabbit's. To me, Rabbit's actions in this episode paint the picture of someone who begins and ends as a sad, broken husk of a man. Some of you listening might not like this reading. I'm sure there's lots of people who would agree with the episode's thesis that what Rabbit did, he did out of love, that he just cared too much. But in this dumb jerk's opinion, if Rabbit really loved Kessie, he'd have let her go. And as far as we know, he never does. So what do I think? Does Finder Keeper promote human dignity, meaning, and freedom? Would I, Ben Saint, noted scholar and champion of the people, award the 1989 Humanitas Prize to this episode? No. And it makes me sad to say that, because I do think the episode is great television. Maybe even just a little bit of a masterpiece. It's moving, man. I was moved. But in the end, I can't get on board with the way it limply lets Rabbit off the hook. I think there's two ways the episode could have been elevated from great to perfect, in my eyes. Option A, make the ending a complete and utter tragedy. Have Kessie realize that even though she loves Rabbit, his influence over her has become toxic, so she flies away and never comes back, leaving Rabbit utterly bereft, and we, the audience, with nothing but the hope that maybe, just maybe, Rabbit might have learned something from it all. Pretty grim, but I guess I'm into that. But if that's too bleak, there's option B. Kessie comes back with the carrot and tells Rabbit that she's changed her mind and decided to stay because she knows Rabbit needs her, and Rabbit says, "No, I've been wrong this whole time. It's not fair for me to keep you here. I know you want to go, so I want you to go too." This would be enough to redeem Rabbit for me. An apology alone wouldn't do it. What his arc really needed was an opportunity at the very end to demonstrate that he's come to understand that real love is selfless. Anyway, weird moralizing and fanficky rewrites aside, this episode is still great. In fact, I feel a kind of dread coming over me that this is the series' high watermark and it's all downhill from here. I mean, none of the other episodes won the Humanitas Prize, so how good can they be? Well, I guess we'll find out. But hey, wow, I'm already past 15 minutes already just talking about one episode. Well, I guess I'll end the video here. Squeezing in another episode now would distract from all that really important stuff I just got done saying about a children's cartoon. Thank you again to everyone whose name is scrolling past now, all of whom are pledging $5 or more to help support my work on Patreon. And as always, you can find me on Twitter and on Twitch and in my fan Discord, all of which are linked in the description, and also shirts. I also have shirts for sale. The end. See you next week, you filthy animals.